Susan Mauldin lived a quiet, predictable life until the night she walked out of her Macon home with nothing but a tote bag and vanished, leaving behind a trail of secret photographs, a hidden online identity, and a farmhouse in the woods that would expose a chilling connection to other missing women. That on a quiet October evening in 2014, Susan Mauldin was last seen walking out of her small brick home in Macon, Georgia. She was 52 years old, with a calm, almost reserved personality that kept her life simple and predictable. Those who knew her described her as polite but distant, someone who didn't involve herself in neighborhood gossip or community events. She worked from home as a transcriptionist, rarely venturing far from her house unless it was for groceries or the occasional library visit. Her habits were so consistent that even the smallest change would have stood out. And on that particular night, something was clearly different. The air was cool, carrying the scent of early autumn leaves. Neighbors later recalled seeing her step outside just after 7:30 p.m., wearing a light cardigan and jeans, carrying only a small tote bag. Her expression was unreadable, neither hurried nor relaxed, but focused, as if she had somewhere specific to be. She walked down her driveway toward the streetlight at the corner, then disappeared from view. No one remembered hearing a car door shut or seeing a vehicle pull away. It was as if she had simply melted into the evening shadows. Her small home sat on the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac, where houses were spaced far enough apart that privacy was easy to maintain. That night, her porch light remained on long after she left, and her car stayed in the driveway, unlocked. The blinds were drawn, but nothing inside appeared out of place. The following morning, the mail carrier noticed her mailbox was nearly full. By the next day, it was stuffed to the point where envelopes had begun to curl from being forced inside. For someone like Susan, who checked her mail daily and disliked clutter of any kind, this was an early warning sign that something wasn't right. 2 days after she was last seen, a friend who hadn't been able to reach her grew concerned. She drove to Susan's house, knocked repeatedly on the door, and peered through the window. Everything inside was perfectly neat. The couch cushions were in their exact place, a folded blanket lay across the armrest, and the small kitchen table had 2 placemats set as if she had prepared for company that never came. The friend eventually called the police. When officers arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. The front door was locked, and the back door was secured with a deadbolt. Inside, the air was still, holding the faint scent of fresh laundry. On the kitchen counter sat Susan's cell phone, turned off and charging. Nearby, her wallet was tucked into her handbag, with her driver's license and credit cards untouched. A plate with crumbs rested in the sink, next to a glass with a thin ring of water at the bottom. In the bedroom, the bed was made with crisp corners, a book face down on the nightstand as if she had been in the middle of reading it. The officers checked her computer and found no recent searches for travel, job applications, or large purchases. Her email inbox was unremarkable, with the last message sent nearly 24 hours before she was seen leaving the house. There were no goodbye notes, no signs of distress, and no evidence of a struggle. It was as though she had stepped out expecting to return within the hour and never made it back. Her family, who lived in other states, flew in as soon as they heard the news. They were baffled by the disappearance. Susan had no history of mental illness, no known deaths, and no recent conflicts with anyone. She didn't use social media, and she had never mentioned dating or meeting new friends. As far as they knew, she lived an entirely solitary life. In the early days of the investigation, police canvassed the neighborhood. Some residents hadn't seen her at all that week. Others recalled only glimpses, pulling into her driveway after errands, bringing in groceries. One neighbor swore she saw her outside speaking to someone a few days before she vanished, though she couldn't describe the other person clearly. A faint memory of a dark-colored SUV parked near Susan's house was noted but never confirmed. Search teams combed nearby woods, parks, and walking trails. Helicopters scanned the area from above, but nothing surfaced. The more time passed, the stranger it seemed. Her bank accounts remained untouched. There were no withdrawals, no purchases, no new phone activity. Even her small garden, which she tended to daily, was left to dry out. As the first week turned into 2, the case began to shift from hopeful recovery to quiet dread. Susan's home remained exactly as it had been the night she left, a snapshot of her life frozen in time. The only thing missing was her, and no one could explain why or how she had gone. Weeks passed, and Susan Mauldin's disappearance slowly began to fade from the front pages of the local news. In the first few days, there had been community search, parties, candlelight vigils, and constant updates from law enforcement. But as time moved forward with no new developments, public attention shifted elsewhere. Behind the scenes, however, investigators were still working quietly, piecing together fragments of her life in hopes of finding a trail point. One of the first unusual details they uncovered was a series of bank withdrawals in the weeks before she vanished. Normally, Susan kept her finances steady, never taking out more than she needed for bills and groceries. Yet, 2 weeks prior to her disappearance, she had withdrawn nearly $4,000 in cash from her savings account. It wasn't a one-time transaction, it was spread over several days, each time from a different ATM across town. There was no indication of where the money went. She had not deposited it anywhere else, paid off a debt, or purchased anything of significant value. Investigators wondered if she was planning something, perhaps a trip she hadn't told anyone about, or a secret project. But if so, there was no paper trail to prove it. She hadn't booked any flights or hotel rooms. No luggage was missing from her home. The money was simply gone. Another lead came from a neighbor who mentioned seeing a dark SUV parked outside Susan's house late at night, just 3 days before she disappeared. The engine was running, but the headlights were off. The neighbor didn't see anyone get in or out and assumed it was someone waiting for a friend or using the street to make a phone call. Unfortunately, the neighbor couldn't recall the make, model, or license plate number. While canvassing Susan's home for overlooked evidence, detectives decided to search the attic. There, under a pile of old holiday decorations and unused blankets, they found a worn cardboard shoebox. Inside were neatly stacked photographs. At first, they looked like ordinary snapshots, fields, wooded trails, and rundown buildings. But as they flipped through them, the locations began to stand out. These weren't typical tourist spots or scenic overlooks. Many showed abandoned houses, weathered barns, and a crumbling church with ivy-covered walls that on the back of each photo was a date written in Susan's careful handwriting. The dates stretched back over several years, but none of them matched any known trips she had taken or events her family remembered. The images themselves felt lonely, even eerie. The buildings were always empty, the landscapes devoid of people. It was unclear whether Susan had taken the photos herself or if they had been given to her. Detectives brought in a photography expert to examine them. The photos appeared to have been taken with the same camera over a long period of time. There was no GPS data embedded in the digital copies, which suggested they were printed from film or stripped of their metadata before being stored. The settings were all rural, some so overgrown that it would have taken effort to reach them. The most unsettling part was that no one in her life seemed to know she had any interest in photography or exploring abandoned places. Susan's life, as far as her friends and relatives knew, had been straightforward: work, home, and occasional family visits. The photos hinted at something entirely different, a hidden part of her life that she had kept carefully separated from her everyday routine. The investigation team began mapping the locations in the photographs. They discovered that several were within a 2-hour drive of Macon. Others were harder to place, possibly from different counties or even states. A few structures appeared in more than one photo, but from different angles and in different seasons, suggesting multiple visits over time. This discovery shifted the investigation. Detectives began to wonder if Susan's disappearance was connected to one of these sites. Perhaps she had gone to visit one and met with an accident or encountered someone dangerous. Or maybe the places themselves held a clue to what happened. The weeks turned into months. The photos became the most promising lead in the case. Investigators visited several of the nearby locations, finding them exactly as they appeared in the pictures: silent, empty, and forgotten. In some, they found signs of recent human activity, such as footprints, discarded cans, and cigarette butts. But there was no proof Susan had been there shortly before her disappearance. The cash withdrawals, the late-night SUV, and the shoebox of photographs formed a puzzle without edges. The pieces didn't fit together neatly, and every time detectives thought they saw a pattern, it dissolved under closer scrutiny. Still, the feeling grew that Susan had been keeping a secret, and that this secret, whatever it was, might be the reason she had vanished without a trace. 6 months after Susan Mauldin vanished, the case took an unexpected turn when a woman from a neighboring town contacted the police. She claimed she recognized Susan's face from the news, but said she knew her by a different name, Claire Monroe. According to the caller, Claire was active in online communities devoted to urban exploration, where people shared photographs and stories about visiting abandoned buildings, forgotten industrial sites, and remote rural structures. The woman provided screenshots from one of these forums, showing a profile picture and posts made by someone who looked exactly like Susan. Under the username Claire Monroe 72, the posts stretched back several years. They featured grainy, atmospheric photos of boarded-up houses, collapsing barns, and weathered churches, often accompanied by short captions describing the history of the location. Some captions hinted at trespassing, with references to slipping inside when no one's watching or walking the halls where time stood still. The tone was quiet but tinged with thrill, as though the writer found a strange comfort in the decay of these places. What stood out most was the pattern of her activity. She often posted in the middle of the night, sometimes as late as 3 or 4 in the morning. The timestamps suggested she wasn't simply sharing old photos. From her computer, she appeared to be visiting these places at those hours. The images she uploaded matched many of the photographs found in her attic shoebox, sometimes down to the exact angle and lighting. When investigators compared forum posts to the dates on the physical photos, the match was almost perfect. It was clear that Susan had been leading a double life, one in which she sought out isolation and forgotten spaces, documenting them without telling anyone in her day-to-day life. She had built an entire identity as Claire Monroe, one that existed entirely outside the world her friends and family knew. Digging deeper, detectives found that 2 days before she disappeared, Susan, under her alias, had posted a photo of a decaying farmhouse located in a remote stretch of countryside about an hour's drive from Macon. The caption beneath the image was unusual: "Some doors should stay closed." It was short, cryptic, and unlike her usual descriptive captions. This was the last post she ever made. Investigators tracked down the property using land records. The farmhouse had been abandoned for decades, with no listed owner willing to come forward. Locals in the nearest town said it was a place kids dared each other to visit, often claiming it was haunted. The building was collapsing in places, its roof partially caved in, and its windows shattered. It was miles from the nearest main road, accessible only by a winding dirt path that cut through thick woods. The connection to Susan raised more questions than answers. Was she there on the night she disappeared? Did she meet someone there? And if so, had it been arranged through her online persona? Detectives began to suspect that she might have been lured. The anonymity of the forum made it easy for someone to hide their identity, and with her habit of exploring these sites alone at night, Susan could have been an easy target for anyone with ill intentions. Her secret life also explained the unexplained. Cash withdrawals. Urban exploration sometimes required bribes for access or to avoid trespassing charges. It also meant travel expenses, gear purchases, and sometimes paying others for tips about locations. Still, $4,000 was a large amount, and there was no proof she had spent it on exploration-related activities. Police quietly joined the same forum under false accounts, posing as new members to see if anyone would mention Susan or Claire. While most users kept to themselves, one particular member's posts caught their attention. This user, going by the handle Gatekeeper, had interacted with Claire multiple times, often commenting on her photos with vague statements like, "We've been to the same places, and some sites aren't safe." The last message from Gatekeeper to Claire was posted the day before her final photograph. "See you there." It was impossible to confirm who Gatekeeper was, and attempts to trace the account led to a dead end. The IP addresses used were from various public Wi-Fi networks, making them untraceable. Yet the timing was impossible to ignore. The more the investigators uncovered, the clearer it became that Susan had been stepping into an underworld that blurred the line between harmless adventure and genuine danger. Her family struggled with the revelation, not because of the nature of her hobby, but because of how carefully she had hidden it. Susan had managed to keep 2 separate lives running in parallel for years without ever slipping up, until, perhaps, the very last night she was seen alive. The farmhouse sat at the end of a narrow, rutted dirt path that seemed to grow darker. the farther it stretched from the main road. Even in daylight, the place felt heavy, as though the air itself resisted intrusion. Investigators arrived on a chilly morning, armed with warrants and prepared for the possibility of finding little more than collapsed walls and animal nests. From a distance, the structure appeared skeletal, its roof bowed inward, wooden siding warped and splintered from decades of neglect. Weeds and thorn bushes had claimed most of the yard, and one corner of the porch sagged dangerously toward the ground. Inside, the air was damp, carrying the sour smell of mold and rotting wood. The floorboards groaned under each step, and water stains mapped the ceilings like spreading bruises. In the front room, an old fireplace sat choked with debris. Broken glass littered the floor, likely from shattered window panes. Animal tracks crisscrossed the dust. It was a place that seemed long abandoned, but something about the stillness felt recent, as if someone had been there not too long ago. The kitchen, they found the first anomaly. A broken camera tripod lying on its side near the wall, its legs twisted as though they had been bent by force. The metal was rusted in spots, but the break looked newer, the edges still clean and bright. Near the tripod was a single, black leather glove, too small for most men, but possibly fitting a woman's hand. No one could confirm if it belonged to Susan, but the style and size matched others she had owned. Behind the house, the investigators pushed through thick underbrush until they reached a half-buried object. At first, it looked like discarded trash, but closer inspection revealed Susan's tote bag, the same one she had been carrying the night she vanished. The zipper was intact, though the fabric was caked with dirt and damp from rain. Inside were a flashlight, a small notepad, and a folded sheet of paper with a set of coordinates written in her careful, rounded handwriting. The coordinates pointed to a spot less than a mile from the farmhouse, deep within the surrounding woods. Following them meant moving through tangled brush and uneven ground, with fallen branches blocking the way. Eventually, they reached a small clearing that appeared deliberately concealed. In the center was a rectangular shape covered by warped plywood, its edges weighed down with stones. When the boards were pulled back, the investigators uncovered a rusted metal box. The box was heavy and difficult to open, its hinges corroded and fused from years of exposure. Inside was a collection of photographs, each stored in a plastic sleeve to protect them from moisture. The images were disturbing, not for what they showed outright, but for the implications behind them. Several featured women, each in isolated outdoor locations, often photographed from a distance. None of the women appeared to notice the camera. Their expressions were casual, suggesting they were unaware they were being watched. When these photographs were cross-referenced with missing persons cases from nearby counties, investigators realized that at least 3 of the women matched individuals who had disappeared over the past decade. In every instance, the disappearances had been sudden, unexplained, and unsolved. The remaining photographs could not be identified, leaving open the possibility that more victims existed or that some of the women were still alive. The condition of the photographs indicated they had been taken over many years. The backgrounds varied: abandoned houses, wooded trails, empty roads, but none appeared to be public or populated places. It was clear the photographer had deliberately chosen isolated settings. This raised troubling questions. Had Susan discovered this box during one of her explorations? Was she the one who had taken the photographs? Or had she been drawn to the location because of them? The possibility emerged that Susan's final trip to the farmhouse had not been random. The coordinates suggested she had been searching for something specific. If she had indeed found the box before her disappearance, then she might have learned something that made her a target. The farmhouse was searched from top to bottom, but no further evidence linked directly to her. There were no fingerprints other than those belonging to the investigative team. No recent tire tracks or footprints survived on the property. Yet, the combination of the broken tripod, the tote bag, and the coordinates pointed toward an encounter, something, or someone, that had interrupted her visit for the investigation team. The farmhouse had gone from a curious lead to a potential crime scene. It was no longer just a decaying structure in the woods. It was a place where the known and unknown parts of Susan's life collided, and possibly where her life had ended. Nearly a year after Susan Mauldin vanished, the search for answers felt as if it had stalled. The farmhouse had given investigators new leads, but no solid suspects emerged. The photographs in the rusted box were sent to multiple agencies, and the images of the identified women were quietly shared with detectives working on their unsolved disappearances. The connections were undeniable. At least 3 of the women had gone missing under similar circumstances, vanishing alone from quiet or rural areas. Yet, without physical evidence linking the farmhouse to any one person, the case remained frustratingly open-ended. Then, in late September, a hunter moving through a marshy area 3 miles from the farmhouse stumbled upon what he first thought was an animal skeleton. As he got closer, the shape became disturbingly human. He called authorities immediately, and within hours, the area was swarming with police and forensic teams. The body had been partially submerged in the thick mud, concealed by tall reeds. The location was remote, accessible only by cutting through dense growth. The remains were badly decomposed, but certain details stood out. The dental records confirmed the identity. It was Susan. Fragments of her clothing were still present, though worn and tattered from the elements. Around her wrist was a thin, silver bracelet that her family confirmed she had owned for years. Her skull showed evidence of a fracture, but the level of decomposition made it impossible to determine the exact cause or timing of her death. There were no obvious bullet holes, no signs of stabbing, but blunt force trauma was suspected. The marsh area became the focus of the investigation. Teams scoured the surroundings for any additional clues, but most of what they found, discarded cans, an old tarp, broken glass, appeared unrelated. The ground itself was a challenge, swallowing anything left behind into layers of mud over time. It was possible that crucial evidence had simply been lost to the elements. The discovery of her body shifted the case from a missing persons file to a homicide investigation. Detectives returned to the farmhouse and the coordinates with fresh urgency, hoping to find something they might have overlooked. They examined the box of photographs again, searching for any sign that Susan might have been aware of its contents before her death. One photograph, taken from inside the farmhouse's kitchen, showed a reflection in a cracked window pane. It was faint, distorted, but under enhanced analysis, it appeared to show a tall figure standing outside in the yard. The clothing was indistinct, but the shape of the head and shoulders suggested a man. Whether Susan had taken the picture or found it already there remained unknown. Attention turned back to the online forum where Susan had used the alias Claire Monroe. Investigators dug deeper into the activity of the user known as Gatekeeper, the one who had commented on her last post with the words, "See you there." Digital forensics traced several of Gatekeeper's logins to public libraries in 3 different counties, each one located near abandoned sites similar to those in Susan's. Photographs. Surveillance footage from the libraries was long gone, but this pattern hinted at someone who moved often and avoided leaving a trace. Despite these leads, no arrest was made. Without definitive proof tying Gatekeeper or anyone else to the farmhouse, the photographs, or Susan's death, the case could go no further. What remained were fragments, a hidden double life, unexplained cash withdrawals, a mysterious SUV, a box of disturbing photographs, and a remote marsh where her life ended. For her family, the discovery of her remains brought a measure of closure. But no peace. They were left with the haunting knowledge that someone, somewhere, still knew the full truth of what happened that night. Locals began to speak of the farmhouse in hushed tones, weaving it into whispered warnings for children and cautionary tales for teenagers who thought trespassing in abandoned places was harmless. The property eventually collapsed under the weight of time and weather, leaving behind only a scatter of rotting boards and the rusted shell of its chimney. The box of photographs remains locked away in evidence storage, a silent archive of fear and unanswered questions. To this day, the case of Susan Mauldin is unsolved. In Macon, her name surfaces now and then, spoken by those who remember her as a quiet woman with a hidden passion, and by others who recall the mystery as a reminder that danger often hides in the places least expected. The haunting part is not just that she was lost, but that she was forgotten for so long, leaving behind a story that may never be told in full.